I will go ahead and share my screen. But the bottom line here is, John, that the Knicks, even though it may not seem like it, have a lot of assets. And the Knicks need to do something about those assets. So we're looking at my screen. We're all
asset
good?
Consolidation.
Asset consolidation. Do the Knicks have too many assets? Yes. So I want to walk us through what's going on here, and then I'll set us up for what is to come after that. So this is a look at the guaranteed contracts that the Knicks have in 2022.
So
we're
next
talking
year.
about, yes, not this season, but the following one. So this is a depth chart for those of you who are not watching, who are listening, maybe. Basically, it's Alec Burks, Evan Fournier, RJ Barrett, Julius Randle of the starting. Well, I guess you could throw in Nerlens Noel actually for the starting five. This was made for context. This was made a few weeks ago, and I've been kind of excited to lay this out and updating it as we've gone along. But you could move Nerlens Noel up to that, and then you got Derrick Rose, Emmanuel Quickley, Quentin Grimes, Obi Toppin, and then of course Deuce McBride, Kemba Walker.
So it's the entire rotation is guaranteed for next year with the exception of Mitchell Robinson.
It's Mitchell Robinson, Kevin Knox, Taj Gibson, and Wayne Selden.
So the entire rotation, minus
right.
Mitchell Robinson.
Right. Yes. Yes, exactly. So here's the information, right? Mitch projected to be an unrestricted free agent. The reason I say projected is because he can still be re-signed mid-season.
Maybe he'll sign tonight. Who knows?
Kevin Knox, he's unlikely to receive a qualifying offer. If he did, he could reject it and become a restricted free agent. But the Knicks aren't going to extend that to him if he's even still on the team because of the fact that he likely would accept it. And that would be a lot of money that he would be getting, and they wouldn't need him on that contract. No. And he would have a no trade clause. That's fun. So he's going to enter unrestricted free agency. Same thing with Wayne Selden, whose contract is not even guaranteed quite yet, but it will be soon. Taj Gibson's second season is fully non-guaranteed. And then, of course, we can then start to incorporate some of the draft things here, right? So the Knicks, of course, have their own pick, but they also would have a second first-round pick if the Charlotte Hornets finish 19th or better in terms of the overall standings for the NBA. So whether they get over that hump or not, to be determined, but if they did, and the lottery protections do change, or the protections, I should say, do change as well. If it's the 18th and below where it's kept for them this year, the following year, if it doesn't convey, it'd be the 16th and below. And I think after that, it's the 14th and below, and then the 14th and below again.
So we should just say, for anybody wondering, as of right now, and the Hornets, I don't think play today or played today. I believe the Knicks would miss getting that pick this season by one. I think there are 11 teams that are better than the Charlotte Hornets at this exact moment.
Correct. And as we've said before, this pick was designed so
it should be 12. Yeah.
Right. This pick was designed so it wouldn't be conveyed this year. The fact that it's close to conveying, I think it's not a problem for the Knicks, but it's an unwelcomed inconvenience. Or I guess just an inconvenience, but it doesn't. It's not the end of the world if it conveys this year
it probably won't. I mean, who knows? Maybe the Hornets make a trade, but like the Lakers, the Nuggets, the Hawks, the Celtics, the Mavs, like these are all teams currently with worse records than the Hornets that I would expect to pass them. Anyway, continue.
And then moving into next season, the Knicks will probably have the non-taxpayer MLE mid-level exception at their disposal, as well as the biannual exception. And who knows? Maybe Rokas Jokubaitis comes over from overseas and decides to play.
Can we say something really quickly about the mid-level?
Please do.
As you say about these sorts of things many times, the mid-level is the type of the non-taxpayer mid-level. I'm not talking about the biannual. It's the type of thing that if you don't use it, you lose it. And it's basically there's a reason why pretty much every NBA team, unless you're dealing with a team that has serious tax concerns, uses their mid-level exception every year, because they're now the way NBA economics works is you could get a really good player for $10 million a year. So spoiler alert, they're going to use that on somebody. Yeah.
Right. Or multiple people because you can
break it up. Yeah.
Right. But that's the thing. And you can't trade a player who's currently on a contract into that exception. You can sign and trade them if they're a free agent, but you can't just trade them into that. So keeping all that into consideration, what does this really mean? Well, realistically, if the Knicks didn't make a move, they would have 4 roster spots available for the following. Mitchell Robinson, Taj Gibson, possibly Jakubaitis. Luka Šamanić is actually going to be a restricted free agent. Jericho Sims is still going to be on a two-way contract, but can always have that torn up and then sign as part of the roster. The potential of one, if not two first-round picks who have been drafted. A second-round pick that the Knicks own, their own. There's also a pick that they own of the Hornets, but it's so well protected that it's just not going to really convey. Potentially any undrafted free agents or someone else is like a veteran minimum, like a Wayne Selden type. So when we incorporate all that, we then consider the 2023 draft, which is that the Knicks have their own first-round pick. They have the Dallas first-round pick. It's top 10 protected. They've got the Hornets pick if it didn't convey this year. And then they have their own second-round pick, they being the Knicks. Detroit's second-round pick, which should hopefully be in the top 10 of the second round. Utah's second-round pick. And then finally, it's the least favorable second-round pick of OKC, Washington, or the third team being whatever the more favorable of Dallas and Miami is. So
what was that trade again?
Oh God.
Oh my God. I remember looking at
one of them actually is from the Fournier sign and trade.
Oh, that's what, no, it's the Fournier sign and trade. That's exactly what this is. Yes.
Part of it. Yes. So, but here's the thing, right? If that Hornets pick doesn't convey, and if the Knicks don't trade any of these picks, the Knicks could be looking at 7 picks in the 2023 draft. Now, the 2023 draft is supposed to be loaded. It's very high profiled and heralded, but you do not need 7 draft picks in one draft. That is just far too many. For context, I mean, that is basically half of what the Knicks roster would be, right? 15 players on a roster, not including two ways. 7, it's just too much. So they're going to have to consolidate in some way. And now we can talk about consolidation. So before we do that, John, I feel like we have to have a conversation. It's got to set the tone conversations. For what we're doing. We've talked a little bit about what's going on with this team, and we can talk about the direction that the Knicks are going. And it's not up at the moment, obviously, with the results that we're seeing. But let's have a chat about buying, selling, doing both, doing neither. Here's my point of view. I feel like the Knicks are going to look at the standings and where they are, and they're going to look at last season, where, as we talked about, they made a little trade for Derrick Rose, and it propelled them into playing and punching far above their weight to the point where they were 41-31.
Yeah.
Do I see a player impacting them to that extent? No, I don't. Maybe there's a player who can still boost them, but might cost more than Derrick Rose, because let's face it, Dennis Smith Jr. and a second round pick, it's a pretty low bar.
They were paying us to take Derrick Rose, as they say.
Pretty much. So even with everything hitting the fan at once, and I know there's this urge when things go wrong to just stick in one direction, be like, nope, that's it. Let's just tank. Let's sell off pieces, do whatever you want. I just do not see the Knicks doing that. I don't see the Knicks looking at the playoff standings being like, we're really close to even being in the play-in tournament. And I know that there is this philosophy of Knicks fans. It's like, oh, well, that's what you're going for. Like, this isn't like the goal isn't the play-in, the goal is a championship. But it's not that simple. But it's not, right? It's all about taking steps. And here's the thing. It's like, if you're going to be upset about the idea of the Knicks consolidating any of the assets that we talked about to plug up some of the holes that we are referring to here, I mean, they've got to do something, because otherwise, if you're doing nothing, this team's going to continue to sink. And if you feel like you don't want to like do anything about it, then why even try? Like, why even have a season? Why even do anything? Well, it doesn't make sense to me. But there is, I think, a way where you can be a buyer, and if things still don't go well, it's not a failure, because if that player you're buying isn't like this win now move, but a player you see working to help you in the future, it's not incongruous. You can actually have it. It's like, for example, last year when the Bulls went in on Nikola Vucevic.
Yeah.
And then they instantly, we talked about this in our town hall. Zach LaVine got COVID. He ironically got COVID again. Hope he is okay. But they traded for Vooch, and then things went downhill. And then they made the necessary alterations the following offseason, and they're doing really well right now. And it's that sort of thing where, as long as you don't give up too much, and we'll get into that more, but you're able. And
I think the Bulls gave up too much in that trade. But
I totally agree. But it's working for them. I don't think that they would necessarily say, I don't think they would resent it. I think they'd do it again. But the point being, you can still be a buyer. And even if the team loses, it doesn't make the trade a failure if the goal is not like, a strictly win now move that won't help you in the future. And I'll turn it over to you, but because I can understand why people are listening to this and might think like, well, why on earth would you trade assets if you plan on losing? It's not planning on losing.
Well,
it's just, there's a safety net and you're still planning for the future.
So Andrew's going to be, I think, very proud of me right now. Andrew, what for those listening at home and don't see what you're wearing, what's the hat on your head?
It is a New York Mets hat.
It's a Metropolitans hat. Exactly. I think I got both names. Okay. There is one thing to make a trade in the vein of Scott Kazmir for Victor Zambrano.
That is an elite reference. I know where you're going with this now. Go ahead.
And during at that time that trade came down, I want to say 12 years ago, right?
It was
11, 10?
2004 season. It was a 2004
my
season.
God, I'm so fucking old. Okay. In my mind, I want it to only be 10 or 11 or 12 years ago. So I'm not so fucking old and I'm still like 32. But I digress.
Mm-hmm.
The Mets at that point in time, if I recall correctly, were on, and I'll be generous, the fringes of playoff contention, but did not profile as a team that was going to do anything.
They were go ahead. Sorry.
No, please, because you have an encyclopedic memory when it comes to this shit.
So the 2004 Mets were coming off a 96 loss season. And then the following year, the 2003 season, they went in with like David Cohn starting games. And within 2 starts, it was like, all right, blow it up. So like Mo Vaughn gets traded, Robbie Alomar gets traded, and all these different guys get traded. And it was like, okay, we're rebuilding. There's a shortstop prospect, Jose Reyes is going to get called up. David Wright's going to get called up. And 2004 was a lot like last season for the Knicks, where it's like, oh my God, they're good. There actually are reasons to have expectation. And they went into the week of the trade deadline, a game out of first place.
That's what it was. Yeah.
So like a really weak National League East where the Braves hadn't taken off yet. The Phillies were the actual team that the Mets were competing with. And it was like, okay, we're kind of out kicking some coverage here. We should just like see what this is in the last 2 months of the season and not trade all our prospects, because we had a rich farm system. And veteran leaders like Al Leiter, Mike Piazza, and John Franco convinced interim GM Jim Duquette, who after this season became a television personality with SNY because nobody wanted to hire him going forward. He then traded their 3 best prospects for 2 pitchers, Victor Zambrano and Chris Benson.
Oh, Benson. I forgot about Benson. That was the one with the wife who was like a porn star or something. Was it a porn star?
I think she was just attractive. Is what she is.
6 of one, half dozen the other. Please continue.
Anyway, they went for it. And with it, like the Mets then lost like 6 in a row. They then called up David Wright. He then played the remainder of the season. The Mets ended up losing close to 90 games. Yeah. But Scott Kazmir then became like one of the better pitchers in baseball through the mid 2000s for the Tampa Bay Devil Rays.
And everybody knew he was going to be great. I remember I wasn't a Met fan. I heard a lot about Scott Kazmir. Everybody knew about Scott Kazmir. It was a huge.
It had such a trickle down effect with the trade, because you then fast forward 2 years later after Omar Minaya takes over as GM, spends all this money. They get Beltran, they get Pedro. They are almost a World Series team in 2006, except they're missing a starting pitcher. Gee, I wonder where they could have had one if 2 years earlier they trade him for Victor Zambrano, who even worse pitched 3 games for the Mets in 2004 and then was a mediocre pitcher in 2005 and then was like out of the league with like a year or 2.
So thank you
you're welcome
for bringing the analogy home.
That was so incredibly precise. I'm very impressed.
He's amazing with this.
Oh, stuff. I know that, but that's very impressive.
So like, if the Knicks did something like that, it would be ridiculous. And what qualifies as something like that? It's a little bit tougher to say because baseball and basketball now trade are not. It's a little bit apples and oranges. But like, a future unprotected first round pick. You don't want to give those up in any circumstances. And I would actually argue at this point, and with all due respect to get your drink ready, Andrew, Zach Lowe's recent podcast in which he pitched as a possible Miles Turner trade, including Obi Toppin. To me, is Obi Toppin the basketball equivalent of what Scott Kazmir was for the Mets back then? No, he's not. But he's pretty darn close. Anthony Davis and his per 36 numbers say hi. I just, that's where we want to avoid. But the notion of going ahead and giving up stuff that you, as I think this is where you're getting at with the consolidation of assets, giving up stuff that you kind of sort of need to give up at some point anyway, for a guy who, and again, I'm guessing where you're going with this, is young, is a guy who you can flip again easily if need be, who's under contract for more than just this season. All of that to me, I'm on board with. It's not pigeonholing yourself into one thing or another. And the reason in particular that I'm on board with this, and then I'll turn it back to you, is the key date for me at this point is no longer February 15th, or excuse me, December 15th. It's February 3rd. And I'm sure, do you know what February 3rd is?
Oh, I know what February 3rd is, but
all right.
You got to get off this Clippers kick, buddy. I'm
not getting off it. I'm not getting off it.
I've opened Pandora's box by accident. There was a completely unintentional thing. Do you want to tell the people what February 3rd is, John?
So February 3rd is the first day that Julius Randle can get traded. And I want to be very clear. I don't think they're actually going to trade Julius Randle this season. I think there's absolutely a chance they trade him in the offseason. And I don't think he's going to be on the Knicks for anywhere near the entirety of his contract. But they can trade him February 3rd. And that's really interesting to me because the Knicks, that to me says that the Knicks have, what is it? It's Sunday, December 12th. Knicks have 7.5 weeks roughly until February 3rd. So they have to keep trotting out this core for the most part until then, unless you think Fournier's get moved, which I'm dubious of. So they're going to get a chance to figure it out. If the thing keeps going downhill or sideways, depending on where the rest of the league is at, and there's some other factors at play, how soon does the Simmons situation resolve itself? The Portland situation seems like it's coming to a head. There may be some moving pieces. So the ship may have sailed by the time February 3rd gets here. That's the only thing I have circled in the back of my mind. And what you're about to talk about, I don't think necessarily has anything to do with necessarily that.
I think it has a part of it though, but
on that note, why don't we continue?
Sure. And yes, just to be clear, there are pretty much 4 things I am very much against. And I think this should set the tone moving forward. Based on the players available and where the Knicks are at and all that jazz, it is moving RJ Barrett. It is moving Emmanuel Quickley. It is moving Obi Toppin. And is moving a future unprotected first round pick. Those are the 4 things that I have zero interest in trading. And now there might be some of you who are out there thinking like, well, this is going to blow up exactly what I'm saying. I really don't think it will. And I have evidence for why, but I will continue now. Before I do that though, I actually just want to talk about the Leon Rose administration and the net in and net out of what has gone on thus far. So what I mean by that is basically I'm not counting players that were here beforehand, like RJ Barrett. I'm not counting picks that were already acquired, like in the Kristaps Porzingis trade. I'm talking about what the Knicks, specifically what Leon Rose and his front office have done since he took over, right? So coming in has been Alec Burks, who I think we can agree has been a fantastic addition.
Yes.
Nerlens Noel, who has been okay, could be better, could be worse. On the court last year, he was very much break even.
Yeah.
Off the court, it certainly tilts in favor of him not being there, but he is to me, a suitable backup big who could be explored to moving forward, especially if Jericho Sims is able to mature into the backup role a little bit more moving forward.
And just to be clear on Noel, he already missed some incentives. He's making $9 million is the actual or is it $8 million?
It's 8.8.
It's 8. Thank you. It's 8.8. Like the term like toxic contract, non-movable. If they want to move Nerlens Noel, they could move Nerlens Noel pretty quick. pretty quickly.
Again, it's also, if it doesn't even happen this offseason, great. We're talking about a player who's an expiring contract if you want it, or 2-year deal. It's up to you. Derrick Rose, hands down, obviously the best addition, I think, in my mind, the Knicks have made, at least turning nothing into something.
Agreed.
Deuce McBride, to be determined, of course. The reason I have Deuce here, if you remember, those of you at home, Knicks had the 32nd pick. They flipped it and turned it into 34 and 38. So you could put Rokas Jokubaitis instead of Deuce McBride. But you got to pick one. I just picked Deuce because he was the second pick. Jericho Sims, which they created out of the Austin Rivers trade. Austin Rivers, who is not here because he was in and he was out. Kemba Walker, who could very easily be finding himself not on this list, period, but more on that soon. Evan Fournier, not a great signing so far, but again, I will stand by this. I will die on this hill because I know it is the right hill to die on. He is not the type of player you trade this year. He is the vehicle for a trade, not next year, but really 2023. But doesn't matter. Right now, not looking great. The Knicks have gotten 7 second-round picks since Rose has gotten here. 5 of them have been unused. One of them is kind of a fake pick, which is that Hornets pick I described earlier, the second-round pick that won't convey, that was part of the Fournier trade.
Not the first-round pick. That's not the fake pick. The second-round pick, yeah.
And then 4 players, really 5, but 1 retired. The draft rights for 4 international players. And then going out, it's been Dennis Smith Jr., and Ignas Brazdeikis. And again, the reason I don't have a second round pick for what went out for Rose, because I already factored it in for the net in. So again, if you look at this list, that's really impressive. Yeah. Not like, oh my God, superstar stuff, but like the Knicks have been able to turn the situation that was incredibly bleak into something that is respectable and good. And I want to keep that in mind because if you look at the net out, the Knicks have made some decent moves, especially on the trade market, really. Free agency, you can give it a C maybe because of the fact that some of them have not been good. Well, but Derrick Rose and Alec Burks certainly helped prop that up. It doesn't really matter because we've only played 27 games this season, 26. So there's time. But in terms of the trade market, and especially the draft, but the trade market too, the front office has done a pretty good job so far, I would say.
I want to at least acknowledge for everybody out there screaming about, well, look what the Bulls did this summer and how nice is that to get Lonzo Ball and Alex Caruso and DeMar DeRozan. The Knicks, I think, pretty clearly made an effort to keep a certain modicum of flexibility moving forward with this roster in terms of not signing any contracts that they did not think that they would be able to move in a heartbeat. And I'm sure you're probably going to get to this, and you kind of already alluded to it with Fournier. And that is a decision that they made. And I think whether or not they are proven right with that decision or whether or not they are proven wrong with that decision, to the extent that they even had the ability to go out and get the players, again, just one example, the Bulls got, I think we're not going to get that answer for a little while. But there was some intentionality behind what they did, which is the reason for the list that we have. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Absolutely. So let's talk about what's plagued the Knicks the most this season so far, right?
Ugh.
RJ Barrett shooting slump.
Why would you have to type this out?
Because we have to talk about it, right? Obviously it was brutal. Julius Randle coming back down to earth from his All-NBA second team season last year.
Yep.
Lack of having point guards, really. I mean, they've got 2 in the backup unit. Obviously, Tibbs does not feel comfortable enough to start quickly. He'd rather have Alec Burks. Alec Burks is an emergency point guard in my mind. He is not a consistent guy, but he's been phenomenal with what he's done, and I can't blame him for not being put into a role that he was placed into. Evan Fournier not rising to the task whatsoever. The center position underperforming. Tom Thibodeau's decision making hasn't been great, but again, the players have not been performing well, so that certainly impacts it. Very weak.
I'll plead the fifth on that one.
Yeah, that's fine. Weak defense and just general team effort. So, John, we got to ask ourselves, what is in the front office's control? I mean, the front office can't make RJ hit his shots, right?
No.
But RJ's been doing a better job of that, which is nice. The front office isn't responsible for Randle coming back down to earth.
I don't put that on them.
But we could say, well, they shouldn't have paid him. Again, as you said, like you can move contracts. I'm really not worried about Randall as much as other people are. I'm maybe more worried about it than moving Fournier, for example, but I'm not.
Are you really?
But it's relative, right? Like if we're talking about a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is I'm petrified and 1 is I don't care. With Fournier, I'm at a 2. With Randall, I'm at like a 3.5. Like I'm at the point where when you look at players in terms of how they get moved, I mean, there was a philosophy of, oh, you can't move Russell Westbrook. Well, Russell Westbrook was moved twice. And I mean, we're comparing Russell Westbrook with Julius Randle. I'm not trying to sound blasphemous here, but the bottom line is that while Russ is a former MVP, the quality of a player you are getting for the contract that he's on, which is like basically double what Randall's earning, I would still rather have Julius Randle fitting into the role of what he is. Because again, I think, well, you could say Russ isn't being optimized in LA, but Randall's really not being optimized in New York. He's, again, it's on him too. But in terms of the front office and this season, you can't blame the front office for what they're doing. They tried to add creators and ball handlers, and it didn't work out. But the point is, it's not so much directly their fault with Randall. You could say indirectly.
No, I don't. I actually don't think it's their fault at all. I think they had to sign him to the contract extension. I think there's less homes for him. I think they'd be able to move him in a heartbeat for something decent if they wanted to. And
the other thing, and I don't want to get too far into this because Lord knows we'll have time to explore this later. Even if Randall didn't sign, some team was going to take a chance on him for the contract that he got. When you see a player is all NBA and you look at small market teams where free agents never would go there, where maybe you want to take a chance on, like, it could be that he just wasn't utilized well. We're willing to take that risk. He was going to get that, which means that you could still flip him down the line, which is why I'm really not worried. But in terms of a floor general, we're going to talk about that in a moment, but it's a question. Who would the front office even get and for how much? Fournier's shooting in the effort, I mean, especially on the defensive end, it's not in the front office. The center position, the ability to trade for one, that is something that's in the front office's control. Tibbs is not going anywhere, as we stated. And you can impact the overall effort and level of defense by making a change.
Yeah, I agree with all of this. The only thing I'll not push back on, but I'll at least play devil's advocate, is this phenomenon that we're seeing with Fournier. I think of like, he does seem to have upset the apple cart a little bit in terms of like their overall style. And could that have been anticipated? Should that have been anticipated? I didn't, because I saw a guy who was like a feisty guy who was like maybe not the best defender, but like you can at least respect what he did on the floor. And it just hasn't worked or blended at all. But I just wanted to throw that out there. But yeah,
100%. So I want to actually just take a quick look at the teams in the NBA. Now, this is what the standings are after the Knicks game. There's some night games that will be impacted, but in terms of the East, it actually won't affect the Knicks at all. So, John, let's start from the top left, which is the East side, the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference. And John, I want us to go through every single team.
Oh boy.
Taking turns talking about point guards.
Okay. I can do that.
Because there is this urge by a lot of Knicks fans, understandably so, of wanting to fill the weakest position, which is the point guard spot. So why don't
I look at it as center, but that's just me.
Sure, but there's still time to talk about that too. But I want to go through this point because I think in order to get to the center position for that discussion, we need to talk about the point guard spot because fans are going to focus in on that. And I can't blame them, but we're going to show why you got to move past the point guard spot because I just don't see it happening. So John, would you do the honors by starting us off with the number one team in the East?
I do just want to say very quickly that the whole point guard conversation is inextricably linked to the Julius Randle conversation and the fact that like, how do you find a point guard who's going to play off of him well and vice versa? And like, it makes it really complicated, which is why, hey, February 3rd. Okay. Let's start with Brooklyn Nets. James Harden's, what am I supposed to say? If he's a good point guard, right?
We don't even talk about good or bad. We could just talk about whether that team that we discuss is going to trade their point guard.
Oh, the Brooklyn Nets are not going to trade James Harden.
Cool. The Milwaukee Bucks are not going to trade Drew Holiday.
The Chicago Bulls are not going to trade Lonzo Ball.
Miami Heat are not going to trade Kyle Lowry.
The Cleveland Cavaliers are not going to trade potential future All-Star, maybe this season, Darius Garland.
Well, we've gotten to Philadelphia 76ers. Call me skeptical that the Knicks are going to trade for Ben Simmons for the reasons we've talked about. I understand that the defense is an issue, and boy, does Ben Simmons help there. It is also the offensive side, the lack of pull-up ability that I think is going to be a huge problem for the Knicks and why they would not want him. I think also when you look at Philadelphia, they're not going to be super eager to trade Ben Simmons to their division rival. And also the Knicks don't have the star equity to trade to Philadelphia that would even inspire them, which means it has to be a 3-team deal, which again, I just do not see happening between two division rivals. I understand that the Nets and the Celtics have made trades. I understand that the Celtics and the Sixers traded Jason Tatum and Markelle Fultz, the picks that became that. I just do not see the reason why the Sixers and the Knicks are trading for a player who would help the defense on the perimeter, but would really muck things up in the offense, especially in the half court.
There's a lot of reasons why the Knicks are not trading for Ben Simmons right now. They're not. So it's my turn. Washington Wizards, Spencer Dinwiddie. They just signed him. They're not trading him.
Yep. Charlotte Hornets. LaMelo Ball is not going anywhere.
Ditto for Atlanta Hawks and Trae Young.
I do not see the Celtics trading Marcus Smart to the Knicks. Or at all, really. But
Marcus Smart doesn't. I don't think he's or Dennis Schroeder for that matter. Of all the things I'm upset about this season, Dennis Schroeder is not one of them. Toronto Raptors, Fred VanVleet. Nah, he's not going anywhere.
Yeah. We got the Knicks, so we'll skip over them. The Pacers. TJ McConnell's out. Malcolm Brogdon can't be traded this year anyway. So, and I'm not listing McConnell ahead of Brogdon. He just came to mind first. So, the Pacers are not a match.
The Orlando Magic, I would imagine, are probably not going to trade Cole Anthony. They might trade Markelle Fultz. Do you want Markelle Fultz? I don't want Markelle Fultz.
I don't. And I believe in Jeroen Weitzman's book, there was something about how Fultz didn't want to be in
a big market.
Right. So don't think it would really work out anyway. Yeah. And he hasn't played this season either. He's not healthy. Yeah. So, and then lastly, the Detroit Pistons, I guess you could say Killian Hayes in this point, since Cade is basically running the offense. Killian is not ready to run the show. He would not be someone that you would want starting.
I don't think that's
starting five.
I don't think that's the answer. All right. Is it my turn? Phoenix Suns. Phoenix Suns are not trading Chris Paul.
Interesting. The Golden State Warriors, they're not going to trade Steph Curry.
The Utah Jazz, I guess we'll consider Mike Conley just signed an extension. They're not trading him.
Yep. Memphis Grizzlies are not going to trade Ja Morant.
The Clippers could trade Eric Bledsoe.
They could. Would it really help the Knicks though?
No.
Okay. So we can rule them out too. Probably also another player that's a kind of a point guard. Not really, but
Reggie Jackson.
Yeah.
No, they're not going to trade him either. They just signed him to an extension.
Yep. I don't think too many fans would want
Please move on.
Westbrook. So we can move on from that one.
The Denver Nuggets have Jamal Murray on the men. They're not moving him.
Mm-hmm. The Mavericks, they're not going to trade Jalen Brunson, who's coming off the bench. They have no other half-court providers other than him and Luka, so I don't see why they would go out of their way to trade that player.
I don't.
They're not going to trade him. Listen, we can have a conversation another day about Jalen Brunson.
No,
I will be having a conversation, but now is not the time for that to be happening. They're not going to trade him.
I'm going to put an asterisk there. Portland Trailblazers are, they say they're not going to trade Damian Lillard. So we should take their word for it.
I think so. But even still, even if we didn't, again, we could have the conversation about Damian Lillard's fit with this team and the costs of what it would take to give up. Is that something you're comfortable with?
Where this team is at right now and the way Lillard has played and the cost that it would take to get Lillard, that is not a conversation that I want to have right now.
Well, that makes two of us, so we can move on. Okay. The Minnesota Timberwolves, I guess D'Angelo Russell, right? In this case, even though I know he's been playing off the bench quite a bit.
Sure.
No, I will let him stay in Minnesota.
I don't want D'Angelo Russell.
Good.
Sacramento, Darren Fox. How you doing?
Darren Fox. John, would you like
Yes?
to? I mean, it's your turn, so please give your thoughts.
I mean, they've been a lot better without him on the floor this year.
And that is not a result of the Kings being bad, by the way. The on-off numbers are individual numbers, which shows that De'Aaron Fox has not been great in general, but he has also not been great on the Kings, who are a bad basketball team. Even though they're half a game out from being the 10th seed.
I know, and he's really struggled, and they've struggled with him on the floor, and the three-point percentage is not where you want it to be. Intriguing buy low candidate. I love Darren Fox. I would take a chance on him in a heartbeat, depending on the cost.
Sure. Well, here's the thing. He's got 4.5 years of his contract.
Yes.
And I understand that a lot of Knicks fans love the idea of De'Aaron Fox, but how many max players have we seen being moved, especially on their second contract with more than even 2 years of their deal? I mean, 2, like we can even say 3. It's what? Andrew Wiggins, and that's maybe it.
Well, the guy you brought up that's been fucking with me ever since you said his name, Blake Griffin, got signed.
But I'm saying second contract. That's a third contract. The reason I said it was for that reason, because he was an unrestricted free agent who re-upped.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen. And there's a reason it doesn't happen, because teams hang on because the Kings are going to believe in De'Aaron Fox, even with Tyrese Haliburton, even with Davion Mitchell. They're going to hang on to him unless they can trade him for a better player. And the Knicks do not have a better player that's worth trading for right now. In fact, you could make an argument, do they have a better player than De'Aaron Fox? I think you could say Randall, but at the same time, again, why are the Kings necessarily doing that? But even still, it doesn't feel like a midseason acquisition to me. Does it feel like that to you? With 4.5 years left?
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't feel like a midseason acquisition to me. And I also don't think they would trade Julius Randle to Sacramento. And so what would that trade even look like? I don't know. He's a name that I would at least keep an eye on, though. But I agree with you. It's probably not a midseason acquisition trade.
Sure, keep an eye on him. But yes, he's not going to do anything right now. And I'd be skeptical this summer as well. But we'll see. Next, San Antonio Spurs, DeJounte Murray. I know you're a big DeJounte Murray fan.
I wish.
But they're not going to do it. And I can't say I blame them.
The Oklahoma City might trade SGA if they can get like the first pick in the draft, because that's what they were allegedly willing to trade him for last year. But other than that, they're not trading that guy.
And talking about years of control, the Thunder have 5.5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, almost even 6, really, because they signed into a 5-year deal, full guaranteed, no opt-out, max contract.
Wait a minute. I see the next team listed here. Is this your John Wall cap or no cap secretly?
You got me. No, it is not. John Wall is not going to be the answer here either. Even as a buyout candidate, it's not. Again, the half court's not there. The transition used to be. It's not really there. We talked about it last week. After the
44 million's there. That's there.
Sure, but you're not going to trade for that. You're going to maybe do a buyout minimum contract. But again, we've seen him play 40 games, I think, over the last 3 years.
It's not what you want.
I understand the buy low factor, but it's just I just don't think he fits.
The Knicks are not
what they do.
The Knicks are not a John Wall away from anything.
That is also true.
And then last but not least, the Pelicans. Who are we considering their point guard? I guess
Devontae Graham.
Devontae Graham, who they just signed. And no, I don't think that's where the Knicks are at.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to wrap this little mini thing up, and I've got more. We just went through 29 other teams, and we identified how many like legitimately good or pieces that might fit with what the Knicks want to do. Because it feels like it's kind of zero considering the real world circumstances.
I agree. The likelihood that they trade for any of the players that we just named is very, very, very low at this point in time.
Okay. So keeping that in mind, we then have to continue moving on. But if you're going to trade for someone, you got to look at these players. So I have group these players into 3 different tiers. The first I'm calling untouchable rotation players at the deadline. And when I say untouchable, I just mean assuming the right star isn't available mid-season. I've got Julius Randle first. I know, has underwhelmed, but I just do not see them moving him right now. If there were a star who could do it, I'd understand. I get what you're saying with the February 3rd deadline. I will believe he is moved this season until I see it.
That's fine.
Derrick Rose, integral piece. And then, of course, RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, Obi Toppin. Any of these 5 players that you feel should not be here?
I mean, I think Derrick Rose is someone that I would be extraordinarily interested to see what kind of phone calls the Knicks get about him approaching the deadline. If, again, we're talking about this team in the midst of 6 losses in 7 games, and we don't really know where they're going to be in a month and a half. But like, Rose is a guy that I would imagine there are a lot of teams that would be very interested in getting him. Is there a team out there that would be willing to give up a first-round pick? Is it worth it for the Knicks to get a first-round pick for Derrick Rose with 1 more year of service after he's been the best player on their team this year? I don't know but I think this graphic is fine.
Cool. I think that's a conversation worth having, depending on where the Knicks are at in the next.
We're not there. We're not there yet.
We're not. So next, I've got players who are outside the rotation. Kemba Walker, where I feel like the best thing with the Knicks underperforming with Kemba Walker out is it somehow raises his value a bit, where he wasn't doing well. But it's like, look, we have so many other problems that Kemba's not the fire. It's not like he is the reason why everything's gone to hell.
No.
Which helps him. So,
nor should anybody have thought that he was.
Right. Exactly. Then you got Kevin Knox, who, again, I'm sorry, John, I'm going to keep Kevin outside of what we're doing.
I don't apologize to me.
Taj, who out of the rotation, but I do not see going anywhere. You could talk about his contract and matching, but don't see it happening. Quentin Grimes, who, again, I don't think you can move him. Not that he's untouchable. He's not. I would have put him in there if he were, but it's the sort of thing where I just don't see a right deal for him. But if there were one, then maybe a different conversation. But he's still technically outside the rotation, even though he's in the rotation, or he was today. And then Wayne Selden and Deuce McBride. Yep. They are guys who are not playing, but if they had to be included, you could maybe understand it. And finally, available rotation players. So Evan Fournier, it's going to be the same old song.
I'm surprised you have Alec Burks here.
Well, I'll explain why I do in a second.
Sure.
But with Fournier, it's going to be like, again, the funniest thing to me has been people in my mentions, and there have been several, who scream, trade Evan Fournier, or I'm sorry, they say Evan Fournier sucks, and then they say, hey, can I trade it for this star? And it's like, guys, come on. You can't want to sell low on a player and hate on him as much as you want, and then try to flip him and pull a fast one on another team. They see the same games that we're looking at. It's not going to happen. So again, I think based on his contract, I just don't see him being moved this year. The reason I have Alec Burks listed here is I think that you could probably flip him for like more of a lateral move. It wouldn't be any of the players that we talked about per se, unless you upgraded that package. I don't want to trade Alec Burks. I think he is arguably the best option the Knicks have, and with what Tibbs wants in the starting lineup. But I don't see, he's clearly in the rotation, and I don't see him as untouchable.
I don't know. I don't know where the deal would be to make sense. Where it would be to make sense to trade Alec Burks.
It'd have to be for another ball handler. But then if we consider the fact that there's likely not a ball handler available, he then shades more into the first category.
Yeah.
I'm not saying if there were a big man, you trade Alec Burks. That's creating a whole other issue on its own. Just to be clear.
Sure.
Okay. Nerlens Noel, again, we discussed it. And Mitchell Robinson, who is now finding himself in the second unit, trying to build up his stamina, still does not have a contract. All that jazz.
Probably still. He looks like with second unit is where he belongs. Okay, next.
Here's the honest truth. If the Knicks want to upgrade, at least one player in the rotation has to go. There's a good chance that type of player is starting caliber. They're probably earning between $12 and $20 million. And for those who are watching, These are what the salaries look like in terms of the formulas. I don't have to go too far into it, but the point is there are several combinations that can work. But we got to keep that in mind because it's, well, who would be traded? But first, if you're trading for a max player, which again, don't think the Knicks are doing, but if they did, any player who signed a max contract before the 2021-2022 season is making at least $28.1 million. So that would mean that the Knicks would have to send at least $22.38 million out. Realistically speaking, if you're sending that package out, it's going to probably start with one of Fournier and Rose. We've talked about Fournier. We've talked about Rose. I just, don't really see that happening mid-season. But there are three things that I want everyone listening, watching to remember. The first, just because the math works, it doesn't make it a good trade.
Or a feasible trade.
Yes. Second, just because a star may be available, it doesn't mean he's the right fit. And third, and possibly more importantly, or most important, just because the trade machine says a 5-for-1 trade works, it doesn't mean it's realistic. If you're trading a bunch of players in the offseason, then it works. But it does not mid-season because the rosters shrink from 20 in the offseason to 15 in the regular season. So there are a lot of moving pieces that go around. There's a reason why the bigger trades that occur are often in the offseason and not mid-season. It's tough to juggle things. Any thoughts before we continue, John?
No, I want to really emphasize like the 5-for-1, even the 4-for-1, like that stuff doesn't happen during the regular season. It just doesn't.
Right. And here's the bottom line. If the Knicks aren't trading one of the untouchable guys that I laid out, Randall, Rose, Barrett, quickly, Toppin, and if Fournier is staying, which I still think he would, an upgrade most likely means one of Walker and Burks has to be moved. Considering how Walker's out of the rotation, he's the easy candidate. Steve Popper tweeted this, and I've been of the same mindset. When the Knicks said Kemba's out of the rotation, they meant it. When fans were saying, "Oh, maybe Kemba will play today," no,
I didn't think for a second he was going to play today.
Right, they're wrapping him in bubble wrap for a reason. They want to work something out, and that is a significant amount of money that you can send out in a trade. And again, I don't think it's going to be Burks unless they can make an upgrade that suits what they're looking for. And with Kemba, you can kind of send his money out for anything. For Burks, I feel it has to be for a point guard, and I just don't see the market opening. And if the goal is to upgrade the rotation, again, someone's got to go. And if it's not going to be Burks, then it's going to be one of Mitchell Robinson and Nerlens Noel.
Yes.
Here's the numbers game. Walker's making $8.7 million. If you add his and Noel's 8.8, 17.5. If you added Knox, it's 23.3. If you're doing Walker and Mitch, it's 10.5 million. And if you're doing Walker, Mitch, and Knox, it's 16.3.
And the one that stands out here is the Walker plus Mitchell Robinson number of being only 10.5, because that is significantly lower than anything else. And it does limit you, maybe not significantly depending on where you're looking, but I have a feeling we're going to get there in a sec.
Right. And of course, these are just numbers. These are not trades, including picks or anything else. That's what it says on the slide. But for those not viewing, just want you to be aware of that. I'm not saying that the Knicks can get away with Walker, Robinson, Knox, and call it a day. That's not the case.
Yeah.
So should we talk about Mitch?
I feel like we've been talking about him having a similar conversation for the last 4 years.
We have.
Incredibly intriguing player. But at this point, when does it just become, he is what he is? And when do we stop waiting? Like, when he figures it out, or when he gets fully healthy, or when this and that and the other thing. I don't know.
Right. So again, if Walker and Noel were traded for some sort of big man, it forces Robinson to a backup role, which he's already inhabiting. But what does that say about his role long term? He's an unrestricted free agent. To me, it just says if he found a gig where he could, be signed to the mid-level and start for a team, if a team wants to take a chance on that, like, I don't know, the Hornets, for example, they could do that. And then you're losing Mitch for nothing. Like it says to me that you have to commit to Mitch. You got to shit or get off the pot. And the Knicks have actively chosen not to shit. Evan Fournier has decided to shit. Mitchell Robinson has not. The Knicks have not with Mitchell Robinson, because they could have extended him this offseason. They could have made him a restricted free agent. Yeah, they didn't. They could have continued having him being a starting player. They moved him to the bench. They are telegraphing exactly what they're going to do and what their thoughts are. but we'll see if they actually do it, because that's gonna send signals to me at least.
I will say I would not eliminate the possibility of Mitchell Robinson sticking around as a backup after the season, although I agree it is unlikely.
Okay, that's fair, and we'll see. But the three players front office has not acquired or extended. RJ Barrett, they didn't acquire him, could not extend him if they wanted to. That would be this following offseason. Kevin Knox, didn't acquire him, didn't extend him. Mitch, didn't acquire him, have not extended him again. You can extend Mitchell Robinson in season. His max is like, I think 4 years, 54, 52, 53 million, something in that ballpark. The exact number I can't exactly remember anymore.
And it's whatever it is. If they want to go less, it's $11 or $12 million a year, starting at $12 million a year. Exactly. Oh, look at Miles.
Yep, we got Miles Turner. So
hi, Miles.
The Pacers were in the news recently about the idea of blowing it up, so to speak. It's more of a retool than a full rebuild, is how they're billing it. Basically, it was Karis LeVert and one of Sabonis and Turner. Sabonis has, it's 2.5, I guess, what the deadline would be, 2.5 years remaining, and Miles Turner has 1.5. Do you have any prevailing thoughts on Miles before I continue to the next slide, John?
Yeah, I mean, and I've shared it in newsletters and on pods this week. I think Miles Turner is a really good player. He's not a perfect player. He's not going to fix all the Knicks issues. He's not going to come here and have the effect that Derrick Rose had. That said, he's a really good player for the contract. $17 million a year. It's a nice number for him. He very impactful defensively. And obviously, for anybody who hasn't read the Athletic story, that he basically came out and said, they're using me here in a way that I don't want to be used, and I'm kind of tired of it. The only part about that would worry me if I was a team that was looking to acquire Miles Turner is you're acquiring him with the expectation that you are going to want to make him happy and potentially give in to some of his demands about having more of a featured role in the offense. And hey, listen, Miles Turner is, 25? Yeah, still young. Who's to say that there isn't a little bit more, bloom on the rose, potentially. I like him. I don't, not as in love with him as maybe some other people do, but I do think it is almost too obvious in terms of a trade acquisition out there in the landscape. He makes so much more sense than anybody out there who could even be potentially available. It's not even funny.
I feel the same way. It's Miles Turner is an answer. He is not the answer. He is the type of player where you can consolidate what we've been talking about, and where you can then create something, turn quantity into quality, and help with the defense.
And for all the reasons you just discussed, there is no the answer out there this year. So
correct. So again, he's a great defender and shot blocker. I mean, we're talking about someone who has been in the 92nd percentile or higher around the rim in 5 of his 7 seasons, one of those 5 being this year. Historically, he's been excellent in transition defense, which is a huge problem for the Knicks.
I like that.
This year, he has not been as good, but again, he's shown significant upside there. He used to be more of a fake floor spacer. That's not who he is anymore. He is a legitimately good shooter. That's something that is certainly important to the Knicks in terms of spacing. He's been great around the rim this year offensively, and which we know is important to Tom Thibodeau, he hits corner threes, John. He has hit corner threes. I mean, there's a reason why Nerlens Noel has said he's been practicing them. I don't necessarily want to see him using them, but it's the point where you can see when he's taking those shots, envisioning someone like Turner, who you feel much more confident in attempting those. That is what would be ideal and add an extra dimension to this offense.
Yes, 100%.
Super important. He can do something with the ball. Currently what the Knicks have in centers in Mitchell Robinson and Nerlens Noel, they're play finishers. Miles does that too, but it's a sort of thing where he can put the ball on the floor. He can take a couple dribbles and you feel like he's not a complete liability with the ball. I think that's something that's really important. The Pacers are in the 77th percentile with Turner on the floor. It's a plus 5.2 difference. When he's off the floor, they're an average team, 49th percentile, negative 0.3 difference. He's actually ranked 11th this year in defensive Raptor, which is 538 stat. Again, there's no all-encompassing stats, but this is one. Take it if you'd like it. I think it's a quality stat. And overall in the NBA, for overall Raptor, he is 22nd, tied for 22nd. Downsides, he's a terrible offensive rebounder. Not a good rebounder, period.
Yeah, I was about to say, not a great rebounder in general. Yeah.
But that's a problem when you look at someone like Mitchell Robinson gobbling up offensive boards. Having Turner, it's a little bit more problematic. I fully acknowledge that, and that is going to be something to consider, especially when you think about how Julius is not a great rebounder, how Obi is not a great rebounder, and how RJ Barrett is actually a good one. And I'm curious how his role would change in terms of the dynamic. And then lastly, Turner doesn't play with a ton of speed. So even though with the whole transition thing, he's not going to be an Obi Toppin-like player, but he does enough where he can impact the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think Julius Randle is actually maybe a little bit better rebounder than he gets credit for, but he's not great. But you could see it working with Turner, certainly on defense. I think you could see it working with him on offense as well. Just opening up the floor a little bit. It would further embolden Point Julius, if that's the direction they're going to continue to go, which again, they have to go for at least until February 3rd. It makes sense for a lot of reasons.
But here's another thing that I think people are often forgetting. It's not just about building around Julius, right? Because if you get Miles Turner, you get a player who complements Julius very well. And we know that they're both from Dallas and they train together in the offseason. They're close. But if you get Miles Turner, you also can play him with Obi Toppin.
Yes, you can.
That is a huge thing. I mean, think about the Raptors game. Why did Obi get taken out? It's because he was not hitting threes.
Yeah. He made one big one, but then he missed a couple. Yeah.
He went 1 for 4. That is a huge element of his game that he has to work on, and he will work on. But for the time being, right, if Tibbs isn't going to go 4-5 with Obi and Julius unless he has to, if you had Julius out and you played Obi and Turner together, I think that could just have extreme dividends, right? And even if it's going well, which I would imagine it could, except for, of course, the rebounding side, I think that could be atrocious. If there is a world where Julius is not the untouchable player in the context of what I'm giving, where he is dealt in the scenario you're saying, or even moving forward, you're still able to have that type of pair. And that's a really nice pair to have.
And also, and I don't know if you're going to, maybe I shouldn't get into this, but like, and we don't have to go through all 29 teams, but like, you go through the league, teams that need a center, teams that could potentially be interested in Miles Turner. Like, again, all it takes is one. I don't know that there is another team that could possibly feel as strongly about what Miles Turner could do for them as the Knicks feel about what he can do for them. In contrast with what they're getting right now, with the possible exception of the Charlotte Hornets, who the Knicks own their first round pick moving forward and are going to have some issues, including that pick or including a future first round pick in a deal. And, it's maybe it comes down to young players, but let's keep going.
Well, we're going to get to that because of course, but here are reasons not to acquire Turner. All right. Common thoughts like the Knicks need a point guard. We just dissected the entire market. That was pretty much why I wanted to do it. We got through it.
I like the second one. This team sucks.
This team sucks. Right. Yeah. Why even try? Well, again, the Knicks are going to try because of the fact that they are this close to the play-in tournament. People might say, play-in tournament, big whoop. We were the 4th seed last year. Again, this is a process. It's not going to be linear. It's a buy. It's an opportunity to build now without giving up significant assets, which we will also get into, but being able to build for later. And someone like Miles Turner, who's 25 years old, as you mentioned, is why you still add to this team and try to get them back, because the cluster between 4th and 10th is really not that long.
Yeah. I mean, they're a streak away. They're also, they're 12-15. They're not 7-20. There's a difference there. And I think, regardless of what you think the long-term look with the team should be this season and where they should go, like they owe it, I think, to the team and what they tried to do this year to make a move if it's a responsible move to make.
Exactly. The idea that Miles Turner is not a star. Yeah. Again, look at the trade market that's out there. The biggest star that has been moved so far since Leon Rose took over has been James Harden. There really haven't been that many other players who have moved since then because of the ramifications of 2019. Yep. If you want a star, it's going to happen in a couple years. And the reason you're going to get that star is because he's going to look at the Knicks and be like, wow, that's a team that's on the rise. That's a team that is set at multiple positions. I feel confident about that. I know being traded, it's going to cost a lot. But even with that cost, the Knicks still have things left over. Miles Turner is one of those things that's left over, and why he at least benefits your team and can be more of that defensive backbone that should help the Knicks get to more of the Tibbs style defense. Low ceiling for this team. Again, in the vein of this team sucks. Cool. The Knicks have their first round pick. They have 2 first round picks potentially. But I'm not too worried about that, but that's fine. Whatever.
Again, that has to do with the cost. So we're going to get to the cost.
And same thing with too expensive. I think it's a shame that it's been floated out there like, oh, well, if it costs like multiple firsts and Obi Toppin and another. Again, I don't think it will cost anywhere near that. I will explain why, but I think that it's kind of a scare mindset where it's like Derrick Rose. We thought he was going to go for a first round pick at some point before he was traded. And he didn't. He didn't go for that at all. So the market can be very finicky. Keep Mitch. The Pacers won't want him anyway. Again, if you want to keep Mitch, cool. I'm done. Sorry.
Wow.
Look, I mean, I haven't been shy about the fact that the Knicks have been skeptical, and there's a reason why
they have been skeptical. We know they've been skeptical. Let's keep going.
If he can stay, then I'd love it. But and even with the Pacers, the idea like, well, why are you including him in a deal? Listen, guys, when you make a trade, you don't also just have to send players to one team. There are multiple teams that might be interested in a player. One man's trash might be another man's treasure. Turner gets hurt. Again, he's been pretty consistent. He's gotten hurt last year, and then I think the second year of his career. Other than that, he's been generally pretty durable. And then lastly, the idea, the fear of like, okay, well, you trade for Turner, then you got to pay him. Well, no shit. Any player you trade for, you're probably going to want to pay them. I mean, but again, any player that you're trading for, and like Mitchell Robinson, if you want him, you're trading for him because you want to extend him too. It's a two-way street. We good? Or any thoughts?
I think I've put a couple of things in here that I wanted to say. I think the reasons for trading for Turner, again, barring the cost, outweigh the reasons not to trade for him. In theory.
Agreed. Let's talk about the potential threats. I know I'm keeping you on the edge of your seat with this whole cost thing, but I think it's important to talk about the threats.
It's important to go through this.
So first we got the Golden State Warriors. They could do it, sure. But here's the thing. Are they really going to commit to a player like Miles Turner when Sabonis might be a better fit for them? A big man who passes, who lets Draymond still play the 4 and the 5 on defense. I think that's really important. If you got Turner, it affects the versatility of Draymond and impacts his game in a negative way. Would you agree with that statement?
I don't think the Warriors are a real threat to trade for him. I'll make that. I think the Warriors are a threat to maybe give up some real stuff for Sabonis, not Turner.
Agreed. And granted, then the Warriors would have to trade one of Wiseman, Kuminga, Moody just to get Turner for the salaries to match. That doesn't feel like a player you trade for. Maybe Sabonis, if they're in their mindset. I think he'd be a great fit there. Yeah. The Grizzlies, I think they're actually a surprise contender for why they could be in on Turner. They also have a surplus of first. They could have 3 first-round picks this year. They could figure out a way to make the math work where they get Miles Turner. I wouldn't count them out. I don't think they're at the top of the list, but the way that they're moving and where their core is at, they actually feel like a pretty good team for him to land on.
Yeah, but especially what they've shown lately with Ja out and how well that team plays together and the cohesion, that doesn't feel like an apple cart that they want to upset right now. And I don't even know that the salary obviously outgoing would be Steven Adams. Steven Adams is an underrated as hell player.
Yep.
Not to say that he's like any kind of long-term answer there at the 5, but I would be like Steven Adams and like a first. Does that get you Miles Turner, an unprotected first or something? Do they give an unprotected first? Like, I don't know. The Grizzlies don't really operate like that. I don't think.
Yeah. And so I'm with you. And, Jackson has been a better rebounder, I believe, this year, but having Turner and Jackson together would also
Yeah.
But hey, if it's something that the Knicks would be willing to do, maybe the Grizzlies are in terms of being able to sacrifice rebounding. It doesn't feel like the right move, but I could see them doing something creative like that.
Sure.
The Celtics, I don't see them trading for another big man. Robert Williams signed his extension, which kind of makes the math funky. I don't think they'd trade Horford for him. Horford's been pretty productive for them this year. Fun fact about this, they wouldn't do it because they'd probably over the tax. But if you look at the Fournier sign and trade, the Celtics got a huge traded player exception. It is just small enough where it cannot absorb Miles Turner. And I do wonder, John,
that's funny.
I wonder if the Knicks, when signing Fournier, we know that we heard from Jay Michael, formerly of the Indy Star. We heard from Begley of SNY saying that the Knicks checked in on Turner before the draft. I believe it from both of them.
I believe
the idea that the Knicks knew that they wanted to go after him. Again, they knew that the Celtics could be a potential threat and managed to sign Fournier for a number that was small enough where they could not absorb Turner's contract fully into it. That's my conspiracy theory, and I'm sticking to it.
It's a pretty good conspiracy theory. I also don't see, with them having just signed Robert Williams, I don't see them as a realistic team to give up something good.
Agreed. Charlotte Hornets. Again, I don't think they're pushing their chips all the way in. As you said, the Knicks have first round pick situation, but you never know. I just don't see Michael Jordan operating like that from a salary standpoint because of having to pay Miles Bridges. We'll see what they do about PJ Washington. He's played a lot of the five, but it just seems like as good as Turner is, that it kind of feels like you're capping your ceiling because you can't move picks for players down the line. I understand why the fit is there. I think it's too much for them to give up.
Yeah, I mean, Washington is the obvious young player to go out in that trade. I mean, obviously, they're not going to trade Miles Bridges. I don't think like Gordon Hayward makes a little bit too much money for one. I also don't think they're going to trade Gordon Hayward. And like people have brought it like book night. It's like book night plus salary. Like, I don't know if you're Charlotte, like why are you giving up that kid? Is that you're giving up him for Miles Turner? I mean, maybe, but like, does PJ Washington move my needle if I'm Indiana? Which again, this has to do with what the Knicks are going to give up. So perhaps we should move on.
Right. Mystery team could be anyone. Who knows? And I actually listed the Pacers' 87-year-old owner, Herb Simon, as a potential threat because of the fact that the Knicks and the Pacers have gone back and forth so many times over the years, especially in the playoffs. Like, again, is he resentful? Is there some part of him that's like Pat Riley where you will not trade with the Knicks? For context, the Knicks and the Pacers have traded once since I think 1985. And at one time, John, do you have any idea when it was?
Goodness gracious. Did it involve? No, it didn't involve. No, did it? Did they, the second time they got Mark Jackson, it wasn't from Indiana, right?
No, was not. It was actually when the Knicks traded for the pick that became King Louis.
Oh my God.
57th pick in the NBA draft. That's
amazing.
The only time that the two teams have traded since the mid 80s. So,
okay.
But different front office for both, obviously, but Herb Simon has still been there the whole time. You just never know. You'd never know. So let's talk about past precedents, because this is going to factor in for the cost. There are some centers that have been in the trade facets, I guess you could call it, the last few years that we should talk about. The first is Clint Capella. Clint Capella and Nene, who was like on a $3 million salary, something like that, were traded for Evan Turner's expiring salary, a 2020 first that eventually was shipped to OKC and became Alexei Pokusevsky, and the 2024 Warriors second. Capella had 3.5 years left on his deal. And when he was traded, he was a very good player. It's not like the Hawks were buying low. That's what the market was. For 3.5 years of Capella, it was an expiring contract, a mid-first round pick, and a second round pick, which could probably be towards the end of a draft.
Yes.
Then you got Nikola Vucevic. The Magic traded Vooch and Aminu to the Bulls, and in return received mind you, Aminu's contract was a year and a half remaining, and then he later got moved for DeMar DeRozan and had to have a first round pick attached in addition to the transition because of his contract.
Not great money.
No, Otto Porter Jr., expiring deal. Wendell Carter Jr., who obviously, lottery pick who had not been panning out, played a lot of the 5. It's not his position. He's more of a 4, as we've seen this year. The 3 ball wasn't there like it is this year. He's been hurt a lot, been healthy this year. A protected first that became Franz Wagner at 8th overall, and then a protected 2023 first as well.
Again, we've talked about this. The Bulls didn't think they were giving up that much for Vooch because the COVID hadn't affected them yet in the way it did. They thought they were giving up probably the 14th, 15th pick in the draft.
Right. And Vooch was 2.5 years. And then finally, this one's a little bit more complicated, but this is Jonas Valanciunas. And basically, to summarize it, the Pelicans got Valanciunas, moved down in the draft about 8 spots, I want to say, taking Trey Murphy.
11 spots.
Right, 11. Yeah. No, they went from 10th to
18th?
Yeah.
I thought they went down to 21st. Oh, wait, no, never mind. The Knicks had 21st. Yeah, you're right.
They got a protected second rounder from the Kings via the Clippers. They traded Steven Adams. They traded Bledsoe. They traded 2021 second. That was Jared Butler, and a protected Lakers first round pick in this year's draft. And there was 1 year of Valanciunas to go. So that's 3 centers, all of whom are good to excellent. And I would say the most excellent being Vucevic, as he was a 2-time All-Star. And it was a young player, and 2 protected first round picks, and a young player who was more than halfway through his rookie contract.
I'll just say Capella reached a new level after that trade, and I think there was some thought at the time, like, man, he's a good player, but like the contract is fair at best for a rim running center that hadn't really ever made the leap from rim running center. And then I think last year, Clint Capella got himself into the Defensive Player of the Year conversation and obviously anchored a team that went to the conference finals. And he's looked at in a slightly different way now than when the trade happened. And then obviously, as you referenced with the Valanciunas thing, like there was a lot more to that trade than that, the money and obviously offloading. And also, let's just be frank, a somewhat desperate general manager. In any case, I agree with you. The center market is not what it can be cracked up to be by some. It is still a bear market.
Right. And so again, if we're talking about Vooch, even if that's a player that Turner is closer to, it's a year less of team control. And we're talking about a very good, two very good picks. One that was especially good, that were first rounders, and a player that in Carter Jr. that was like, okay, he could be something, but it's worth the upside, but he's just disappointed. And so, again, this is the last slide, but here's the bottom line. I didn't write this out, but this is what I want to say. The SNY trade, that was Turner for, what was it? Kemba, Knox, Mitch, a first round pick, the Hornets one, and a second round pick.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a little bit more than that, but I don't think, based on the teams that we've analyzed, the trades that we've seen, any of that, the focus on a center, I don't think it's going to be this ridiculous haul that some may fear it. And again, if it is more, it's like, as Jack said, and I'm of the same philosophy, Jokic, if you put in Rokas there, I think that also is something different, because that's a player where the rookie scale contract doesn't exist because he was a second round pick, but you don't have to worry about that timing out. You got a lot of team control there. So I can't help but feel like it's not going to be this massive deal. It's going to be pretty good. And if it's anything more than the SNY package plus Rokas, then depending on what it would be in real life, I think it would be an overpay.
So I'm looking at the Indiana Pacers depth chart right now, which is probably a futile exercise because even if they trade Miles Turner, that's probably not the only move that they do. Last drink of the episode, when Lowe and Bobby Marks were talking about this on their latest show, they made a pretty good point, which is that the Pacers are in a unique situation, not only because TJ Warren is coming back, but because of their complexion of their team, that less might not necessarily be more. But I think some of their fans may look at some of the situations there, especially with Karis LeVert, who's been, I think, a bit maddening to those fans this year, as like, well, if we lost Karis LeVert all of a sudden, I'm not saying we'd be better, but I could see a world where that makes sense. There's a long-winded way of saying, I think Karis LeVert is a guy who is likely to be on the move too. I think someone will probably want him. I think some good team. He makes, the salary is a little bit much, but he could give you points and playmaking off the bench, which is where his role should be. So when we look at their depth chart right now, in terms of guys who are real pieces moving forward. So let's put Brogdon aside because he just signed the extension. They can't trade him. Justin Holiday's solid player. Torrey Craig's solid player. I feel like I'm forgetting. O'Shea Brissett, impressive little player. He's getting some time. Those are not like long-term answers type of guys. And they also, none of those, I don't think profile is like your classic 3-and-D. Torrey Craig probably comes the closest. Duarte, they got a nice piece of Duarte. Obviously they just drafted, oh my God, I'm forgetting the kid from Isaiah Jackson, the kid from Kentucky, and then they have Domas, which, what do they do with Domas? We don't know. I mean, do they really want to shake things up? Uncertain. Do they want to trade Domas and keep Miles Turner? There's different options here, but I could see them looking at a guy like Quentin Grimes and being like, well, you know what? He could do some things really well. And perhaps most importantly, and you referenced Mr. Simon, who would sooner cut off his own nipples than go into the tax. Quentin Grimes is on a very, very cost-controlled deal. He's in the first year of a rookie contract. So he's had 3 more years. And he is a guy who I think has already shown himself to be, at the very least, a serviceable 3-and-D player from like right now. And a guy who can make shots and a guy who can play defense. Now, every Knicks fan listening to this, especially those who watched the performance on Sunday, is like, yes, so why the fuck do you want to give him away for Miles Turner? For me, if I'm Indiana and I'm looking at this situation, and maybe this is where I disagree with you a little bit, all due respect to Rokas over there in Europe, who appears to be a nice point guard. Maybe he'll be a nice backup point guard in the league someday. If I'm Indiana and I'm trading Miles Turner, I think I'm trading him because I know my team is going to get better either this year or in the foreseeable future. And if it's just about the picks that New York is willing to give up, and like, if I'm New York, I'd be like, okay, you want the Charlotte pick and the Dallas pick? Have at it. Take both. And then we'll give you Kevin Knox and Kemba Walker, and we'll call it a day. Or Mitchell Robinson, but again, it's a 3-for-1, makes it a little tougher.
I was going to say, basically any deal between the Knicks and the Pacers is probably going to include a third team. And that third team likely is OKC, because of the fact that they are so far below
they could take
the salary floor that they can just absorb money into their TPEs.
Yes, exactly. Which, we don't have to get too much into that rabbit hole. But so if I'm Indiana, do I hold the line at OB? Well, if they hold the line at OB, then they're probably not going to trade Miles Turner to the Knicks. And maybe there's another deal that they like more, but I don't think there's any chance in hell that the Knicks trade Obi Toppin. I think Grimes is where this trade ultimately comes down to. I have no idea what the front office secretly thinks of Grimes. Tibbs sure seems to like him. He played him 40 fucking minutes today, Sunday. That's perhaps an indication of what Tibbs really thinks about him and how much he likes him and what he thinks he could do moving forward. And the Knicks, it has to be said, they've gotten less from their first round picks than any team in the league since Patrick Ewing. Quentin Grimes is a guy who's a nice little player. And am I willing to forego the opportunity to see just how serviceable of a player he can be over the next 2, 3, 4, perhaps beyond years for the opportunity to get Miles Turner? I don't know that I'm willing to sit here and answer that question right now. But it would give me some serious heartburn if I traded that dude in this deal. If it's Rokas and the Dallas pick and the Hornets pick and, salary filler, then I'll go pick up Miles Turner from the airport.
So I don't disagree with you in terms of what you're saying with Grimes. I think that's completely valid. And if we go back to the idea of what the depth chart is, again, I don't necessarily see them trading Fournier. I mean, they could trade him in the offseason, but I just don't think it's necessarily going to happen. So you're talking about Fournier and Barrett. And then you're also talking about Quickly and Burks. And where does that leave Deuce? Excuse me, where does that leave Grimes? It leaves him as someone who might be out of the rotation. Now, is that a reason why not to do anything with Fournier? No. But I'm just saying, realistically speaking, there's a higher likelihood, in my mind at least, and maybe it's wrong, so be it, that Grimes could be moved for another piece that helps them elsewhere because he's at the end of the bench, generally speaking, for someone like Turner, than for them to kind of push him up and then push someone out. But again, I'd like for him to be there. I've gone back and forth with the idea of adding Grimes because Grimes would essentially be that Wendell Carter Jr. type player where it's like, all right, Miles Turner for Grimes and Mitch and the Hornets first, like that would hurt. But I would also understand the philosophy going behind that. The money wouldn't work there. You'd still have to add Kemba.
Yeah, I know.
But I hear you. I struggled with the idea. I think selfishly, I have fallen victim to the idea of not wanting to give up more than I would like to as a fan. But when looking at the other deals, it doesn't feel like it's nearly as much as one may think.
The only other issue here, and Grimes is not the level of player. I understand Carter Jr. had injury issues and it was further into his rookie contract. I get all of that. Grimes is not that level of talent. Carter Jr., there were people, who thought he was the best, one of the best 2 or 3 players in that draft. I just, again, I'm looking at it from Indiana's perspective. Like, why are you doing it? And if it's one thing that I think Indiana has shown us already, perhaps, or maybe not, I don't know. I'm just assuming. I don't think they're the desperate team in the situation. I think the Knicks are the desperate team in the situation. I don't know that they're projecting desperation, but if they're kicking the tires on Miles Turner, you could do, I mean, and again, everybody watches the same games, so they see what the Knicks centers are not giving them. So if the Pacers are like, no, and if you don't give us what we want, we're just going to take this thing to the trade deadline. I think this deal becomes potentially a lot less worth doing for the Knicks in the beginning of February than it does a week from now, right? Or whereabouts.
So to put a pretty little bow on this, as I know we've certainly taken enough time, we're basically saying it's some sort of 3-team trade where the Knicks are sending out Kemba Walker, Kevin Knox, Mitchell Robinson, Quentin Grimes, and the Hornets first. Is that something that we're trying to find common ground on, as opposed to adding Rokas in a 2nd-round pick?
I would much rather add Rokas in a 2nd-round pick.
Of course, I mean, I would rather trade for Miles Turner and not give anything up of value. But realistically speaking, is that kind of where we're saying is something that it hurts a little, but it also is somewhat rewarding in what you're getting back? I don't know. But I just don't think it's going to be, multiple firsts and
I wish I felt
3 young guys.
I wish I felt confident and comfortable that the Pacers want Mitchell Robinson. I just think Mitch's stock is super low right now.
It is. You're selling low on a few of these guys, but
yeah,
but that's the thing. That's why I'm saying it would be a multi-team deal where you're probably sending Mitch for a veteran or a minimum contract or into a TPE. I just don't see him landing in Indy as well, but we'll see.
Yeah. Look, I think if you put a gun to my head right now and you ask me, is the trade going to happen or is the trade not going to happen? I think the trade's going to happen. And I think it'll probably, again, it's December 12th. Could we be talking about this trade this time next week? I wouldn't rule it out. But we'll see.